to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
Today,
did you guys know that the number of people who drown by falling into a swimming pool correlates with the number of films that Nicolas Cage appeared in?
How so?
Stats.
That's so funny. Oh, that number of what to Nicolas Cage?
The number of people who drown by falling into a swimming pool correlates statistically with the number of films that Nicolas Cage appeared in.
In a certain year?
I guess so, yeah.
Wow.
That's how...
Once they fall
that's
in,
why
they're
his
gone.
career...
They're usually gone in 60 seconds.
Hey, gone in 60 seconds. That was good. Hey,
Yeah,
that's
Steven.
Steven with the Garden Audio. We finally have him mic'd up.
That's so funny.
That's going to be fun. Gone in 60 seconds.
I was listening to a podcast recently. They were talking about
That's dark.
different male actors. Different male actors that were such a big part of the radar, and they kind of go away. Brendan Fraser was one of those. They mentioned that Brendan. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
Fraser.
Is it Fraser?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not
That's going to
Fraser.
throw me off the rest of the day. Thank you. I'm just going to be running it back in my mind. But he just dropped out of nowhere, and they were like, you know why? Because people stopped casting people that have receding hairlines. And so I think that they stopped casting Nicolas Cage because too many people
No.
We're drowning in swimming
people were
pools.
dying.
Have you not heard that they're doing another face-off?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, like in the whole movie?
Face Off 2.
Well, and the guy
Back again.
who's writing it, he's like, I'm not going to do it unless we're continuing their story. Like, it's going to
okay.
be
Yeah.
them.
And both of them signed back on?
I don't know, but he said it has to be them and it has to be the similar kind of thing. So do they trade faces again?
I never saw Face Off. I was
Oh.
too young when it came out because that was rated R.
That was back when I was putting Nirvana tapes in my Amy Grant CDs.
That's right. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh, that's so smart. Why didn't I do my CD cases back when I was a kid?
Well,
I
we
did it
quit
with CDs
listening
too.
to Amy Grant when she went
She got divorced.
Yeah, she got divorced, and everybody at church was like, "Oh, you can't listen to her anymore." And then her next video had a guy and a girl at a laundromat, and they're flirting, and the girl pretends like she's going to take her shirt off for the boy, and everybody's
Wow.
like, "Oh no, Amy Grant lost it."
She did lose it.
I know,
That's ridiculous.
Amy who?
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Belinda Carlisle.
How you doing, Ryan?
Well, thanks, Pierce.
Good. Mike, are you doing all right?
I'm actually doing a lot better now. I preemptively opened my Dr. Pepper before we started because I really
needed it,
really
man.
needed it.
Not a sponsor. Yeah.
Not a sponsor. Yeah, I'm doing
I'm
good.
loving
You
this
didn't
new-
ask, but I'm fine.
Thanks.
Well, I don't really care.
This new setup we have at
Right?
the Garden Audio
Dang.
in Steven's studio is
Steven.
phenomenal.
So if you're
is
audio only
beautiful.
right now, you can probably hear a little bit of a difference. There is some upgraded mics and stuff like that here. But if you're video,
Hey.
everything's updated. It
Yeah.
looks amazing in here. So if you're audio only, swing over to YouTube, subscribe while you're there, and check out the video. It looks great in here.
So good.
Steven, say I'm the best.
I will not say that.
Also, Steven's mic'd up, so we'll shout out Steven.
I
all
don't
the
think that
details later.
he meant for you to say that Pierce is best. I think he meant for you
No,
to say
say
that you're the
say
best.
You're the best.
Pierce is the best.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
That's crap.
Speaking of the B and the best, let's just shove over there to the PCC. What's up? Pierce's Culture Corner.
Yay.
What's it? Ooh, nice.
There it is. We were waiting.
This is going to be so much fun.
Oh, man.
I didn't know if you
We're
actually
here.
wanted me to do it.
Oh, dude, yeah.
man.
I was like,
our
is it going to happen?
Our podcasts now are going to be like 2 hours long.
Yeah, no, just messing around the whole time. So in Pierce's Culture Corner, I've been seeing memes float around. People just making fun of how many streaming services there are, which, I mean, once people realize that, well, hey, I have the rights. I am, let's say Disney, for instance. I have the rights to all of my stuff. Why am I just selling out licensing agreements to Netflix and other places when I can just have my own streaming service?
Sure.
So, yeah, there is the aspect of maybe there's guilt, or maybe not guilt. Maybe there's, I don't know, everybody's hoarding their own stuff. I don't know. I can't think of the right word there, but
Selfishness, opportunity.
Yeah, maybe
I don't know.
maybe it seems that way, but it's their properties. It's their licensing.
Say selling your own product.
Yeah, exactly. It's their stuff to do with what they want to do. So what people are doing is they're complaining. They're saying, well, now it costs just as much as cable. My first reaction, though, isn't that isn't to jump on board and be like, yeah, we should just go back to paying cable, because whoever wants to go back to just paying for cable, I don't know if any of you guys like cable more than streaming services.
So I think it's funny you say that, because I think that there are benefits. Like,
To
I
cable?
don't have cable right now, but like there are some huge benefits, I think, to having just everything in one place. The downside of not having streaming is like, you can't go to cable and watch all the Disney stuff or all the Netflix stuff.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
exactly.
So like there's more customization, and
Yeah.
people who are complaining about that, it's your choice to buy it.
That's another thing too, is that like cable still exists. But my first reaction is, what happened was, even though we're at the same place where we may be spending the same or more, we're at a place now where entertainment's fully customizable and better. We're like, if
Yeah.
I want to watch this movie, I can watch this movie. I don't have to set up my TiVo to record that movie and then make sure that commercials aren't
Yeah.
turned on. That
So-
way it can record it without ads.
And part of the reason you feel that way is because you don't watch live sports very often.
That's very true.
So,
but
like,
also, like,
I watch it through apps.
Well,
but-
yeah, I watch all my
they're-
football through YouTube TV now.
Yeah, but that's
not a
like
sponsor.
cable.
Yeah.
so
true.
would that be considered cable, or would YouTube
No,
be considered
cables. I'm just saying, like, it's set up to be more like.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about, what you're talking about, is we don't have anything like Ryan, like Hulu TV or YouTube TV. What am I forgetting? Like, there's one we used to have. Anyways, they're set up to work like cable.
Yeah.
Where you have,
yeah.
It's
You
not
have all your
cable,
local
but it's-
channels.
you have to
and-
watch
What you're
it at that
talking
time.
about is like you don't have any of that stuff. You have Disney Plus, you have Netflix, you have
Yeah.
Hulu, not Hulu TV, but just like
Yeah.
Hulu. So like I watch all the Mavs games because what
So-
else would I watch through Fox Sports Go? But
So
I can't
question-
watch it without a cable subscription, so I log in.
Oh,
with,
really?
I
Okay.
log in with.
Don't say.
So we get ESPN through
else's.
Verizon now.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I haven't done much with it. Hannah's done more with it than I have. Can you go back and rewatch games with those people who have the ESPN apps and stuff like that? Just go like rewatch games from
Some
the
of
past.
them.
Yeah, they'll have some of them on there.
I gotcha. So yeah, that is a huge advantage. But I think that
But
streaming services are trying
You can't
to.
rewatch it soon.
Oh, okay.
Like you couldn't go back the same day or the next day. Usually,
Oh, you'd
and
have to
rewatch
watch it at that time.
Sometimes it's the next day, but I guess it's sometimes later.
So in that respect, cable will be better because you could record it.
yeah,
on some
That's
device.
what I'm saying. There's
Yeah.
still some huge benefits to
I
having some
gotcha.
kind of service, even
Yeah.
if it's not. I think you're right. There are probably very few people who are going to still do cable, except now I feel like a lot of cable companies are realizing that, and they're offering these packages that are comparable to
The streaming
YouTube
stuff
TV
or
whatever.
and stuff like
And
that.
I think that is probably the core of where most of my reaction would go to, is that I would say we're at a better place entertainment wise, and I would have to include that in my definition, because I'd have to say, because it made the cable people have to realize, okay, we have to broaden our scope a little bit to fit this new form of
Yeah.
entertainment. It's kind of like here in San Angelo, we had one movie theater for the longest time, so it was garbage. Like the carpet looked like crap, the walls were falling apart, and then as soon as we got another movie theater, well, hey, both movie theaters are now nice, and they're
Yeah.
both
I
have
haven't,
sales. and
I
they
haven't
both-
had to send a popcorn back since we got the other.
exactly, yeah, because there's actually competition. You'll
Yeah.
actually will
No,
leave.
I really did send popcorn back.
Oh, I know.
I
You
would
need
get
to.
it and be like, nope.
I'm not gonna pay
make me
$10.
another
I'm
one.
gonna pay $10
I've
for
gone to
cold
the movie
popcorn.
with you before when you've said like, how recently was that popcorn popped? can you make some fresh popcorn?
I mean, if you're gonna pay $10 for a bowl of popcorn,
Yeah.
it better be a fresh bowl of popcorn.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where I am right now. I think that we should, if you're one of those people that are just complaining about strictly prices, really just sit back and think the world's getting a better place because of technology. I mean, even though there are some benefits one side or the other, I think that we're still cleaning up the mess of what our entertainment can be.
Yeah, because used to it was just like which cable service are you going to get,
Exactly.
or which cable service is available in your area.
And maybe one day we will reach the pinnacle of perfection. We will be at a entertainment paradise, as it will, heaven of entertainment.
Oh gosh. Okay.
So
All
Ryan, what are we talking about today?
I will say that's not your worst transition ever.
Not at all.
Not even close. That one was actually okay. Like
Yeah.
I'm going to give you 3 points for that.
Out of,
Well, he's up to 17.
Oh.
You know, it's kind of cumulative.
I gotcha.
When he
So
gets
one-
to 1 million, I buy him lunch.
Yeah. When the podcast is done or one of us dies is whenever it's just, okay, we're done. How many points do you have?
Yeah. God's keeping track of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Pierce, I'm glad you asked. So today we are talking about heaven, and all of its different names, or all the different things that people talk about. So like New Jerusalem, or Abraham's bosom, or the new earth. I think it'll be fun just to say bosom a whole lot during the podcast. And
Ryan.
yeah, Pierce.
Stop. Just how can we cover an hour on heaven? Doesn't every believer already know what that's all about? Isn't that like the core of like why people would come in? That's how I was told the gospel. Don't you want to not go to hell? You want to go to heaven.
Well, actually, Pierce. I think I do think that every believer has a concept of heaven. I think the majority of believers' framework of heaven is not shaped biblically. It's shaped through some sort of, like books, literature, and like not books that are seeking to be apologetic, but books that are fiction, and good books and fun books to read, but fiction books and really bad movies with Nick Cage. Because remember, he did the, what was it called? The Left Behind series. They were going to...
Nicolas Cage did?
They redid it.
They rebooted it.
There were
They rebooted
so
it.
many people that died in swimming pools that year.
Yeah.
Because of him.
Yeah. I think that most people's view about heaven is, I don't know, shaped by, I call it like Hallmark Christianity, like these
That's
little
a cable channel.
yeah, these little images you see, on Christmas cards or birthday cards or whatever, like Christian kind of stuff. And so, for me growing up, I would hear a lot about the crystal sea, or the sea of like crystal, and the streets of gold. Those were really emphasized a lot. And then being up in heaven, like that's how I heard everybody talk about it when I was a kid. You're up in heaven. So it was always placed as somewhere up there, up in the sky. How many people, we were just talking about, Pierce, how you don't watch sports a lot, and that's okay. Harry Potter playing Quidditch.
Thank you.
There
now
you go.
I know what you're talking about.
Didn't make. Do you call it a goal? What do you call it?
Yeah, I think that's what they call it.
Yeah, you don't make
Stupid.
a goal and then point to the sky. You know what I mean?
Make it crap.
But people like point up, like God's up there, up in heaven, and so I think that we have that kind of idea. We have an idea about heaven. I think one of the most common misconceptions is that people imagine their loved one in heaven looking very similar to the way they looked on earth. But healthier, better, but just a better physical fit version. And so if the loved one that they lost was a young kid, they picture a young kid in heaven running around and playing. If it's an older person, they picture an older person, but now without any of the sickness.
Would it be sweet if you could choose?
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like if you could say like, all right, can I get the 6-pack?
Well, but let's be honest, right? 1 Corinthians 15 tells us that we're going to get glorified bodies, spiritual bodies. And so the spiritual body is going to be better than any piecemeal thing that we could put together, right? It's better than cable. And so, or better than Hulu and Netflix. And no, but so I think that's a big misconception. I remember a lot of songs. I don't remember who sang it, but who sang the song? Michael, you were talking in church the other day about the worship music and the Christian music from the 80s and the 90s. Who sang the song Thank You? Do you remember Thank You for giving to the Lord?
Yeah, it was Gay Bolts.
Gay Bolts. Yeah.
I meant Ray Bolts.
There you go.
If you don't know that reference, then you can look that up later. But
hey, Gay Bolts.
But yeah,
Thank you
for giving to the Lord. And so
you used to teach my Sunday school.
So
when I was only 8.
here's this whole concept of you going to heaven. And if you were a good, faithful Christian who led Sunday school and stuff, then all these people were lining up all around you to thank you and praise you for your work, which is really man-centric. So I think all of this stuff is just really man-centric version of heaven. I can't tell you how many sermons I heard on the mansions. One verse out of John 14, where Jesus
is
says,
not even necessarily
mansions.
Translated mansions.
Right.
Yeah, only the KJV, I think. I believe,
I'm going to prepare a place for you.
Yeah.
In my Father's house are many rooms.
I think there's some debate on that. I haven't looked at that, but I think
still though, the emphasis, I literally heard people, they would say stuff like, I hope that my mansion has this and this and this. And that was the focus. And it's not a God-focused view. It's not, I had an acquaintance, pastor friend many years ago. He did a whole series on heaven. And in the course of it, he would talk about how he would say, whatever you enjoyed on earth, you'll enjoy more in heaven. So if you enjoyed playing golf on earth, you'll be able to play the perfect golf game in heaven. If you enjoyed football,
that would be really boring.
Right, because it would be perfect all the time. Everybody's shooting 18.
18?
Yeah.
More.
No,
you'd hit a hole in one. Oh, you mean 18?
18 total.
I got you.
There's 18 holes.
I thought you meant 18 down.
No,
I got you.
Yeah, it's 18. Because everybody's getting it all the time, and
I didn't know golf, so I was like, I mean, maybe. Is there gonna be Quidditch in heaven? I mean,
You're just nodding. Yeah, 18.
Yeah, 18.
I can tell
Oh.
you, if there was a game that would be played in hell, that would be it.
Oh, we just lost a lot of followers. Unsubscribe, unsubscribe. No, but like,
It's gonna be fun to Photoshop later, though.
yes, that will be fun. But they'd say stuff like, if you enjoyed, buttermilk biscuits on Earth, imagine having buttermilk biscuits in heaven. And I think all of those things, I think all of those things. So here are some images that I was taught all the time: streets of gold, crystal sea, clouds, you in this body, in some version of your body, and with a mansion with all your favorite stuff in it, and banquet halls just filled with your favorite foods.
So sorry, you can finish.
No, but that's how people portrayed heaven.
It's the prosperity gospel without the guilt. I think that's just what you're doing is you're proclaiming like you're
That's
going
a
to
good
get
way to
everything
say it.
you want, but then when somebody doesn't get it now on earth, there's a level like you promised me I could get this stuff, but if you make it, well, you're going to get it all in heaven.
Yeah.
Then it's just the prosperity gospel. So it's exactly what you said. It's all completely man-centric, and it makes total sense too why there's so many people that either leave the church or just have been atheists their whole life, that they say, well, I understand why people would need that crutch, but I don't necessarily need that. I've been told that to my face before.
Yeah.
Like, I understand why you may need that crutch, because their understanding of the gospel is it just boils down to heaven and hell. No Jesus involved. It just boils down to heaven and hell. Where are you going to go? Do you want to go to the place where you're happy and not sick, or do you want to go to the place where you're tortured all the time?
Right.
And obviously people are going to be like, I want to get all the stuff. Like, that's where I want to go. I want to get these things over here. And it's boiled down to still complete selfishness, complete pride, complete everything else. And what it is it's actually pointing to the flesh without there actually being flesh in the picture.
Yeah.
If that makes sense at all.
Well, go ahead.
There's a passage in a few verses in Hebrews 11, which I think are so telling on that, from that perspective about Moses. That Moses, what is it, considered the reproach of suffering with his people, considered the reproach of Christ of greater value than the treasures of this world, because he was looking forward to the reward. And so I think that's what you're saying is like Moses' perspective was correct. Like what he was looking forward to wasn't like the stuff, because he had
All the stuff.
He had all the stuff.
Yeah.
And he was saying what is coming, Jesus, is of greater value than all this stuff. And so then to diminish, I think what people don't think about is to say that what I'm most looking forward to is the streets of gold and the buttermilk. Dude, can you imagine?
And the buttermilk biscuits.
I would love to be able to say that I could eat buttermilk biscuits and not be just affected with like my tummy issues and stuff.
Well,
Like,
that's the one thing you still have in heaven. Everything tastes so perfect. Like, no.
You're all bloated and gassy.
but what people don't think about is
by
like
the crystal sea with your harp. Exactly. You're
See, guys,
blowing wind.
no one's coming near
By
me.
the crystal sea.
But like, what they don't, you make it sound pretty as a preacher when you say, here's what you're looking forward to.
Yeah.
What you don't think about is you're diminishing Jesus
100%.
by saying that these things are what we're looking forward to.
It reminds me a lot of the C.S. Lewis quote, which he's talking about just the broader sense of the gospel, not necessarily heaven, but he talks about how you guys are so content with your mud pies beside your house whenever God offers you a holiday at the sea.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing.
Your
is that
Christianity,
like,
right?
I think so.
Yeah.
And within that point is, it's what it is. It's you don't understand how big God is. You don't understand how good God is. You don't understand how gracious God is. And just even like what we just started a series as well, talking about God's glory being what is illuminating. Sun, moon, and the stars are gone. And
Well, we started a series on Revelation.
Sorry, I didn't finish my sentence. So about Revelation, talking about at the end of all things, whenever the New Jerusalem comes, it's God's glory that fills up the whole place, and that we can't even fathom that right now, because while we do have insight into the character of God and the nature of God, and we're given the mindset of Christ through the Spirit, there's going to be this level of full experience that with sin and sorrow and doubt and fear wiped away, we're able to experience the fullness of God completely. And it's going to be surrounding us. And so, like, for us to diminish that and say, man, I sure hope I have my Game Boy Color in heaven. Like, at every game there is, like, you're exactly right. You're spitting
Jesus.
on God. Like, it's I don't know. It's just so unbelievably selfish. And it's not the heart of the gospel at all.
Well, when we make it about golf or fishing or buttermilk biscuits or Game Boy, whatever you said, we are imagining from our perspective things that were for us good memories or enjoyable, or things that were pleasurable, and we're overlooking stuff like Psalm 16:11 that says, in the presence of God is fullness of joy, and in his right hand pleasures eternal. And so what we're doing is we are exchanging I don't want to make it so far as like what the Pharisees were doing or what the people of Israel were doing when they rejected God, where they exchanged the glory of God for the glory of man. But like essentially that's what we're doing. We're saying that I want to paint heaven as all of my greatest moments on earth perfectly portrayed, instead of I want to paint heaven as perfect God revealed.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that I've learned to ask when somebody approaches me with a question about heaven, and they'll say, well, what do you think about heaven? The very first question that I've learned to ask now is, what do you mean by heaven? Because if you mean the New Jerusalem, streets of gold, crystal sea, if you mean Revelation 21, then that hasn't happened yet. And won't happen until after the 1,000-year reign, won't happen until Christ has returned and there's been the great white throne judgment, and this present heavens and earth are destroyed and made new. So like, so I ask people, like, when you say heaven, do you mean final resting place? Or are you talking about paradise, which it's a one-verse reference, but I still think it's valid, where Jesus says to the man on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise. I shouldn't have said it that way because I don't know that it's said exactly that way.
I think it fits for this conversation, though.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I just mean like, anyway, it doesn't matter. And then...
no, I mean, we can get there in a second, but I think it fits for this conversation.
And then the one reference in Luke 16 of Lazarus being in Abraham's bosom. And I think, and maybe paradise and maybe Abraham's bosom are the same things, two names for the same thing or whatever. New Jerusalem, I think, is probably a safer way to pinpoint what we're talking about.
And I think there's also the sense of like Isaiah 6 or Revelation 4. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because that's obvious. Well, it's obviously, it seems to be different than the other two things you've described.
Yes.
And like the description of God seated on his throne.
Yep.
It's interesting because there's some similarities to what you see at the end of Revelation. But like when John says it in Revelation 4, he says the appearance is like a sea of glass. He doesn't say this is a crystal sea.
Right.
He says the appearance is like a glassy sea. And those of us who've been on the water, or like anybody who was like a pro wakeboarder, like Steven used to be back in the day.
Wow.
Semi-pro, is that more of a fair statement? Anyways, but that was a thing, that was a term we would use, right? It's like glass. Like this is how we view water. Like when water is perfectly still like that. So we don't know what it is. He's just saying what he sees. So I think there's also the sense of like, there is something called heaven that the Bible describes as like, or whatever term we're going to use for that, as this place where God is now seated on his throne. That's different than what we would call Abraham's bosom, and it's different than what is described at the end of Revelation.
Yeah, and I think, Micah, that's a really great way that when we're having this conversation with people, we can say that in all the cases, heaven, if we want to use that term generally speaking, is, like you said, Micah, being in the presence of God, being with God. What we can do is say that the shape that takes is different in Revelation 21 than it is in Luke 16, than it is in these other places, you know? And so I think the final form of it, if you will. So, Pierce, I'll pick another thing that's probably from your world, Pokemon, right? Like, no?
Sorry, you missed
that. Wasn't you?
I traded cards when I was 8, but that was only because it was cool.
Oh, okay.
I never actually got into it.
All right.
Was that your generation though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the final...
I don't know the details though.
Yeah,
Pokemon, do they play Quidditch in Pokemon?
I wish. In hell.
But yeah, this idea that the final form of heaven is the Revelation 21, the new heaven, the new earth, the new Jerusalem colliding with earth, and all things being made new.
The point you're making is when we typically have talked about heaven in past or in culture, we tend to make these like generic references to things that we don't seem to correlate with some of the scriptures. Right. So like when someone says, I'm looking forward to this particular thing, they're rarely talking about what's described at the end of Revelation.
Right.
Is to your point.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It was 2 podcasts ago maybe where we talked about baptism and how the Bible really talks about baptism in a lot of different ways. Yeah. And I think the same is true about the presence of God, heaven, what we would call heaven. There's a lot of different ways. So, Micah, I like that you brought up Isaiah 6, right? So Isaiah, in the year of King Uzziah's death, sees the Lord seated on his throne. He has this vision of God. It is not unlike the vision that Micaiah has. Is it Micaiah in 1 Kings 22? Who he's making a prophecy to Ahab, and he says that he saw all the spirits and all the angelic host around the throne of God, and God said, "Who will, you know?"
Is it the lion spirit?
Yeah, who will defeat Ahab, or who will cause Ahab to fall? And a spirit comes forward and says, "I'll do it. You know, I'll be a lying spirit." And so, like, there are all these glimpses of God in what we want to call heaven. So, like, wherever God is, I think we could call that heaven.
Yeah.
I think we just have to acknowledge, like, that when most people, and I don't mean us three, but I mean just in general, we have to acknowledge that when most people are talking about heaven, they are talking about those who have died in Christ, where they are right now, and they are usually thinking of the Revelation 21 picture instead of an Abraham's bosom or a paradise kind of
Think
picture.
about what's coming, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the questions I get a lot is like this almost doom sense of like, I don't want to just sing songs the rest of my life, for the rest of eternity. And it's interesting. Is it Psalm 16 you brought up earlier? Is that what you said? That's such a potent thought that like full contentment? What does he say there?
In the presence of God is fullness of joy, and in his right hand pleasures everlasting.
Okay, so like we have no idea what that is experientially.
Buttermilk biscuit.
So like when we
while playing Game Boy.
my guess is probably
With six-pack abs.
probably the majority of the times we think about heaven, we're thinking about it the best we can from the little bit of context we have, and that begins to shape for us how we feel about eternity instead of going, this is going to be better than I could ever imagine.
Right.
And I'm looking forward to the hope of knowing that we're done with all this crap. We're done with all the turmoil and trials here, and I get to have the fullness of joy forever in the presence of God, knowing that I don't know what that's like.
Right.
I don't have any emotional sense of it, but knowing that that's coming. Instead, I think what some preachers have done in the past is tried to mask people's lack of understanding or ignorance, not stupidity, but ignorance of what the Bible says about it, or what's ignorance of even what's coming, because there's a lot not even in the Bible about it, by saying, here's something you understand, like mansions and gold, and here's something for you to look forward to. Instead of the Moses perspective, Jesus is better.
Yeah.
Jesus is better.
Well, and maybe you're right. So like there are these pictures of God in the Bible that we wouldn't say are exactly how God looks. Ezekiel describes him in a certain way. Isaiah describes him in a certain way. Moses encounters him in a certain way. So they all describe him. There's smoke and there's fire and there's lightning and there's thunders and all these things. But maybe you're right, Micah. Maybe what we've done poorly as teachers and preachers or whatever is we think of the best things we can think of.
Yeah.
And we're like, man, these mansions and streets of gold, and like you're going to be healthy and all this stuff, and we are missing that the highest form of pleasure that we could ever have is in the presence of God.
Yeah.
That there is a pleasure to be had in knowing God and being near God and seeing God that eclipses every other thing that we've ever experienced. And like, I feel like, I mean, just looking back over nearly 46 years of life, I would say that there have been a lot of moments that I've really enjoyed and have been really good. And like cool places I've traveled to and great foods that I've eaten, and, you know, like watching my sons be born and like watching Michelle walk down the aisle for our wedding. Like but all of those are going to pale in comparison to Christ. And how could they not? Like,
Well, and it's a value system, right? Is it not? I think what's telling is if we, I think you said this Sunday at church, we tend to say, God, I'd like this thing to happen in my life before you come back, or before before the end comes. I want to see my kids born. I want to get married. I want to. We used to joke. This is probably too vulgar for this, but jumping anyways. We used to joke that like it's somebody's honeymoon night that Jesus is going to come back on. You know what I mean? Like,
right before everything.
But this is our perspective. Like, God, please, I want to get these things done, and it's a tell of our value. Streets of gold has no value except for the fact that in the ecosystem of finance that we're in the world, it has value. You guys remember that there was a cartoon, DuckTales, back in the day? And what was the older
Scrooge
duck's name?
McDuck.
Scrooge. He would swim in his like vault of money. You know, if inflation goes up in the U.S. like crazy and the dollar has no value, then that cartoon means nothing because he's swimming in toilet paper in essence. You know what I mean? So like it's a value system. And so what we're saying by putting our hope in earthly values that we think are going to be in heaven is we're saying, God, we don't value you much. And what I think is telling is that means that's probably how we live our life. And so maybe the encouragement for us is to say, what do I actually put my value in? And I think here's how you can tell. When economic crisis comes, like it did last year, maybe some of us are still living in it, and things don't go as well financially, and you find yourself more distraught, not, I think, worried and frustrated, all those things are fine, but more distraught and less hopeful because things are hard financially. What you're saying is ultimately your hope rests in things here and now, finances, and not in God. And so I think that it's a tell for us, like it's probably just the West, it's probably mostly just the U.S. and our perspective of heaven. But I think it's a tell that our value system actually lies in earthly treasures and not in the hope of eternal joy and contentment in God.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it too, I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, most of the time when heaven is talked about, it's usually when someone is first coming to the Lord or the gospel is being shared with them. Yeah. And then it's usually at funerals. Like
Yes.
It's usually that's beginning of coming to know Christ, whatever that may look like, and then death. And so I think that especially here in the South, again, that's my only experience that I've ever had. You go to all the funerals and you hear the buttermilk biscuit story. That's what you hear from the pulpit. And then being on the side of where I've had several family members die and several close people to me die, being on the side of it, they're even understanding and having a clearer view of these things than most people in our culture have. There is still that slight like cultural like, wouldn't that be nice? Like there's a level of like, I've seen her enjoy buttermilk biscuits. I've seen my grandma play poker on Saturday mornings, and we have a good time. If you play good poker on earth, the best poker you're ever going to play is in heaven.
So everybody that dies that likes to play poker,
they're all winning.
How? How does that work?
But again, it's terribly circular. But there's
split pot every time.
Yeah, exactly. Every single time, you just get fed up eventually. Like, I want to win.
Flip the table.
Never mind. But you go there, and then because of that emotional connection, that usually ends up shaping what you believe about it. And there is a level of it too that, like, through talking about Revelation last year, and now going into this series at the 456. There's a level of it as a pastor that even though we don't have all the details necessarily ironed out, there is a responsibility to clear up so many of this cultural and misunderstandings and misconceptions of what these things are, because it is so much better. So like the simpler view of this, which usually is our simpler view, is that Jesus is better. Stop making heaven about you. Stop. And also, for a lot of people, it's probably easy to say, cool, I'll stop making it about me. But when your grandma dies or your dad gets in that car accident and you're going to his funeral, that's where you also really have to double check yourself, because it may be easier in that moment to say, man, he's hunting in heaven now. He's hunting the best deer ever in heaven. And he's hunting up there now. He's shooting with golden bullets in the sky. Like there's those types of things that like you may want to say.
That wouldn't go very well. I think the melting temperature of gold is so low that
it would just
turn into a shotgun.
But when you're tempted to do those things, check yourself, because before you wreck yourself, because in those situations, most of us are okay with lying as long as people feel good.
Yeah.
And even if it's to ourselves.
Say that again, because that hurts, right?
Do what?
Most people are okay with lying.
Yeah.
As long as it makes someone feel good.
Exactly. I didn't know if you were making fun of the breath that I had to take afterward.
No.
I got a bubble in my throat.
I'm just thinking, because I'm hoping that what our listeners will do is be a little more careful about how they speak about heaven.
Exactly.
But also maybe get their butts kicked a little bit, because essentially what you're doing, if you know that heaven is about Jesus, but you pander to people all this other stuff, you're lying. You're selling something short of God.
Exactly.
That's why we call it a better place. Like when someone dies, they're in a better place now. Mm-hmm. Well, as a believer,
that's true.
It's true, but it's not just a better place. This is like, why are we set? Like,
why are we describing it as a better place?
It's not just a little bit better. It's like, And then I've heard pastors who do funerals as well, who, for the sake of making the family feel good, will say to a family of someone who died that they're not sure is a believer, or they're sure they're not a believer, well, it's nice to know that they're in a better place now. And I always want to stand. I'm not ever going to do it. I just want to stand up and be like, that's bullcrap.
Yeah.
Like they didn't put their faith in Jesus, and I'm not going to stand for this like offense of the gospel. But obviously, that's not going to go over super well. So
exactly, yes, especially in our culture. Well, and also like I think a good way to temper some of those things, that if you're trying to I don't know if hopefully you're not surrounded by death constantly at this point where you have to do this, but say you are, say you're going through a season of, I mean, I lost my grandma's back to back with it from September to December. And so I was used to all of those things happening in one semester of time. But if you find yourself stuck in that certain mode of language, I think a good way to tweak it is we do have an understanding of what pleasure is on this earth. We do. Most people have experience looking at their bride coming down the aisle. Most people have experience holding their baby for the first time. They've experienced these things that we would say are like the pinnacle of the human experience of joy.
Sure.
And you can, instead of saying they're hunting in heaven or they're doing whatever up in heaven, you can say, man, remember the smile he had on his face last August when he got that deer? He's feeling that, and that level of joy times infinity. Take what we understand, but don't make it about what we understand.
Yeah.
Make it about God. Say, man, God is so much better than the buck he got last week. Yeah, sure, she has 15 grandchildren on this earth, but guess what? Joy in the Lord is way higher than joy that she had with
or
those.
things we know. The Scripture says, like you mentioned at church Sunday, that every tear will be wiped away.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, so like turmoil's over. So like our hope, we can hold on to the things that we know the Bible talks about,
Yeah.
Right.
instead of trying to make up stuff that it doesn't say.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and I know that some of you, hey, thanks, Stephen, for tagging me in that post.
Thanks, Stephen.
Is your iPad on the internet right now?
Yeah.
How?
I guess it's connected to my phone.
You shouldn't have your phone's supposed to be an airplane.
Oh, I didn't do that on my
it's
phone
fine.
either.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
We're
Thanks,
upgraded.
Stephen.
Oh, we're good.
We're good. Let me get Wi-Fi. How dare you?
This is season 2, baby.
almost, man. We've been doing this almost a year.
I know,
right? This podcast and one more, and then we'll be in May.
We weren't part of the conversation.
No, this is season
This
2.
is season 2.
Oh, okay.
We started it, man.
Look
because
around of the new stuff.
Look around, man.
That's it, man.
Stephen keeps telling me I need to bring art, and I keep forgetting to bring art. But it's
Yeah.
also because we all ride together,
True.
and I never think to bring it home from my
Well,
studio.
it
So
won't
one day,
fit in your little tiny car,
It
will
won't.
it, Pierce?
We'll have to fold it up.
Put it on the roof.
Yeah.
So what was I saying? Oh yeah. So just I know that some of you listeners are going to be thinking like, so where is my grandmother, or where is my Uncle Ted, or whatever, and so.
Why is it always white people names? Why can't it be like Filipino names?
Give me a Filipino name. I don't know any Filipino names.
That's my favorite thing that's ever been said on this podcast.
Still waiting on the Filipino name. Nothing.
It's the same as all the Spanish names. So.
Juan.
Juan?
Where's Tio Juan?
Yeah, why can't you say that?
Tia? Did you say Tia?
Tio. Uncle
I
Juan.
thought you said Tia. I was like, that's the female version. Well, she was mannish.
Sorry, Uncle Ted.
Yeah. So, or Juan.
Just different variations of white people too. Where's Seamus O'Connor? I don't even know. Oh, sorry. Racism.
Wow. Yeah. So some of you are wondering, before we got sidetracked, you were wondering, like, so where's my loved one right now? And so one of the things that we would say is that 1 Corinthians 15 tells us that we don't get glorified bodies until Christ's second coming. And then in that moment, in the moment that Christ returns, we will all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. And so a couple of things. Don't picture your. You said Seamus. Is that Irish?
Yeah, Irish or Scottish. Seamus O'Connor.
So don't picture your Irish.
Wasn't that Sean Connery's name? And
Is Seamus O'Connor? I don't know. Probably.
So don't picture your Irish uncle or your Filipino uncle or your Filipino aunt named Juan. Don't picture them in the bodily form that you knew them. Don't picture that in the presence of God, because the Bible's really clear that flesh and blood does not inherit the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
So these bodies don't go beyond death with us. And so what we do see now, we can talk about the nuances of this another time, not in this podcast. You're welcome to reach out to us or text me or call me. But what we do see in Revelation is that during this tribulation period, there are some people who are martyred, and their spirits are in the presence of God, and they're crying out to God for justice, for the martyrdom that they have faced, and they are there in spirit. What we also see is the story of Lazarus being in Abraham's bosom, being in the presence of Abraham, being in the presence of God. We also see Jesus telling the thief on the cross, "You will be with me in paradise." We see these pictures. There's an idea in Ezekiel 32 where the king of Egypt, who has set himself up against God, is cast into death or Hades or Sheol or Abaddon or whatever. And the kings of the Assyrians are there, and the kings of the Babylonians, and it kind of goes through about like 6 different nations that are there. And it says that the king of Egypt, who has rejected God, finds some comfort when he sees all the other kings there too. So there is this place where people, like Micah was mentioning a minute ago, who have rejected God are, and there is a place in the presence of God where people who have accepted God are, that isn't the new Jerusalem, the new heavens and the new earth, that isn't the finished version. And they don't look like you know them to look. And when they get their glorified bodies, they won't look like you knew them to look. They're going to be, we're going to be different. And so,
we're not, it's kind of the intention of like, there be no marriage.
Yeah, there's no, you're not married or given in marriage.
Yeah.
And in 1 Corinthians, he describes the glorified body as different than the earthly body. There is an earthly body that we have, and then there is a spiritual body, and it is different. And he describes them as like the sun being different from the stars, or the seed being different from the plant or the fruit kind of thing, you know? And so it's whatever we're going to be in the presence of God is far and above anything we can ask or imagine or comprehend. And so we've got to shift our minds away from thinking of our favorite aunt or favorite uncle or our grandmother or our kid or whatever in heaven doing the things that they like to do on earth, you know, doing needlepoint. And if they were a grandmother with all their other grandmother friends that went before them doing needlepoint and
diamond encrusted needlepoint.
There you go. We've got to quit thinking of it from such an earthly perspective, and we've also got to, I think, be a little bit uncomfortable with the question marks. There are a lot of things we just don't know. But instead of trying to fill those in with earthly things that we know aren't right, let's just say, look, we know that we get a glorified body when Christ returns. We know that the glorified body does not resemble the physical body. We see several examples of people who in spirit are in the presence of God. We see the story of Lazarus, who is in the presence of God. We see the story of the guy on the cross where Jesus says, you'll be with me in paradise. All of these things. We see Jesus in 1 Peter 3 going and preaching to the souls that were in prison. And specifically, 1 Peter says, these are the ones who died during the flood. So there are all these people who died in the flood. There were 8 righteous, the Bible says in Hebrews 11, and all the rest are dead, and all of them got preached to by Christ. And I have no idea what the implications of that are, but there is a is sentient the right word that I want to use? There is this, you are aware. You are aware when you die of being somewhere. You are sentient. You are cognizant of things going on around you, and there is a place for those who do not know God, and there is a place for those who do know God. Listen, no one's in hell. The lake of fire doesn't happen until Revelation 19, and the false prophet and the abomination of desolation, we call them the Antichrist, they're the ones that get thrown in there in 19, but no one else gets thrown in there until chapter 20 in the great white throne judgment. And so like when people, we could have this conversation about hell too. Usually what people mean about hell, no one's there yet. And yet there is a real place that people are. It's weird to say people. But.
And I think kind of what you're saying is there's question marks as far as the details go. And I think it's fine to have conversations about those things.
Sure.
We need to make sure that those things, to your point, are not the fill in the blanks, because we don't know, you know. Like, here's a thought, like holistically, maybe the simpler viewpoint of this whole thing. Genesis 1, God makes man in his image. We screw it up in chapter 3. And then there's this redemption story that happens. And then Revelation 21, God hits the reset button to some degree. And the people who have put their faith in Jesus, who are now redeemed, it's perfect now. It's no more. So what we have, it's so funny because what we have now is such a tainted version of what is going to be. And so to say that my hope lies in a tainted version, you know what I mean? That'd be like saying I want to drink a Mr. Pibb instead of a Dr. Pepper.
That's ridiculous.
I mean,
I haven't heard anything stupider. Or more stupid.
That happened to me at Cinemark in town. I was just used to saying I get a Mr. Pibb because they didn't have Dr. Pepper for the longest time. And he goes, "Oh, we no longer sell Mr. Pibb. Is Dr. Pepper okay?"
and
I looked at him and I was like, "You have no idea how okay that is." It's like, you just brightened my day.
Come on, man. Where's the angelic voices over there?
Is there angelic voices? Yeah,
that'll work.
that's what I did.
Yeah.
I erupted into a crowd of applause.
Can you carry that around with you? Like when someone tells you something awesome, you just
Like, give me one
turn that
second.
on? Yeah.
One thing I want to clear up as well. I don't know if this is everywhere.
Wow,
but I
you
see
pointed
it.
your finger at me like so
everywhere that I
fiercely.
see it. It's my PowerPoint.
That's a good one.
That joke is going away. Boop.
That's awkward.
Here, get in there, Micah. Come on.
Do a power boop, a simpler boop. We don't become angels.
No.
I think that's.
Thank you for saying
what's
that.
tempting is that the people that believe that of like, well, so and so got their halo today, or so and so got their wings today. The people that believe that, it's easy for them to take everything that you just said that is biblical, that we do see in the scriptures, and to twist spiritual body into an angelic body. But one thing that I think is also is an offense to who God is and who He's made us to be is that it's proclaimed that we are higher than the angels.
Right.
That if we become an angel, we are actually then becoming lower than what we are, who we are in Christ. And so with this new spiritual body, we're going to have the same standing before God because our standing is dictated upon Christ. Yeah. But we have this new body that isn't lower as the angels, but is something completely new.
Right.
So
people get that misconception, I think, from one verse. I want to say it's Matthew 23, but don't hold me to that, where the Sadducees are trying to trick Jesus about resurrected life. And he says, you're neither married nor given in marriage in heaven, but you are likened unto angels. Mm-hmm. And so there's a comparison.
Which...
I
can see, it's like people forget what similes are whenever they're trying to make like solid stances on stuff.
Yeah. I think you see this across the world in many different religions where you have what we call folk religion. And so there's stories that cultures bring into their religion. Like I was in some parts of Southeast Asia where they were mostly Muslim, but the area I was in, they still worshiped their ancestors. Oh. So they were worshipers of they were Islam, but they also continue to practice their ancient worship of, like, they had these temples where their like kings and queens are buried, and they would go pray for fertility. So I think we even see that here. It's just masked a little bit differently, where we have like folk religion, like this idea that actually comes from, as far as I understand, it was a very old, like even pre-Roman Catholic viewpoint of stuff like that, or maybe even during the Roman Catholic like heyday of the angels, like. Yeah, what happens. So I think a lot of that folk stuff is brought in. So I think it's a great point because it needs to be something we're conscious of. That just because we grew up believing it and hearing it doesn't make it true. Right. It has to be the scriptures that are the standard for what we believe and what we don't believe.
Well, and saying, as a way of speaking highly of someone, wow, they're such an angel, is one thing, but
saying they actually became one,
that's a completely different thing. Exactly. It's a great point though that you bring up, Pierce, about that we will judge the angels because we're higher than the angels. And so we're higher than the angels until we die and become an angel, or what? Like,
exactly.
how does that work?
Yeah. Like, we get demoted whenever we die. Like, man, it was better down there.
Yeah. And I think that's showing too this like lack of intake of the scripture. I was about to use some harsh words, but
okay, pause for just a minute here. Earlier, he said, this might be too crass for this. And then you said something that was like super soft and not crass at all. And now he's like,
talking about sex.
Yeah, I know. But like you said, what if Jesus comes back on somebody's honeymoon? And that was all you said. And,
I had a lot of things running through my head.
Oh, man, I'm glad I bit my tongue just now.
and literally, we've said way worse stuff. And then you're like, I don't know, this language is pretty harsh. And like, I'm just thinking like,
it's season 2.
Is this a softer Micah now that you're 40 or what? Like, now that you're 40, you're getting mellow in your old age?
So what you said is that what it looks like is that I appear to be softer as I get older, but I actually am a little bit more intense.
Ah, I see.
So it's just like more potent. I think more about what I say before I say it, which I don't know.
I just think it's funny.
So anyways, I think it's showing that there's a lack of intake of the scripture.
Oh, 100%.
And I think that's if you're at a place where your viewpoint of heaven is shaped solely by what you've heard and not by what the scripture says, I think that you're missing out. In the very beginning of Revelation, it says, blessed is the one who hears the words of this book and reads the word of this book. Like, there's a blessing that comes from just reading and hearing the hope of what's coming.
I remember asking a pastor once after a couple of sermons on Revelation, I took him to lunch and I just said, look, everything you've taught for the last 3 weeks, where'd you get it? Like, where'd you come up with any of it? And his answer to me was, oh, I didn't know we were going to talk about this. I could have brought a book that I had read, and I'd show you where I got it out of this book. And I'm like, no, but like, where in the Bible?
Yeah.
And he was like, no, it was this book that I read. And I was like, but where in the Bible?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I don't know. And so,
I have some harsh words for that.
Yeah.
I'll save them for later.
yeah, wow. Mellow Micah. I don't know what to think
Put me in a
about this.
room. Put me in a room with that guy. It looks a little bit different.
There we go.
So the simpler, Pierce, the simpler version of this is what?
So yeah, if you guys don't have much to add on, I can kind of do a quick wrap up and do
Please.
that. I think it's an extension of what both Mike and I had said, is that like at its core, Jesus is better. And what does that mean? It means that at the beginning of everything, God created everything perfect. Community with him, walking together with him. Man screwed that up. And then we see this beautiful story throughout the scripture of this redemption tale. And tale, it makes it sound false. This redemption
American
story,
tale?
yeah, American
tale.
Right. We got Fievel and Jesus just singing out.
Oh God.
Mauschwitz.
Oh.
This beautiful redemption story, and then all the way culminating into Revelation, where we see the end of all things, where this earth, these heavens, everything is wiped away, and everything is then made new through Christ, through the power of God, and we are able to dwell with him fully. And so, in regards to heaven, that's what most people think about. They think about the end all, the final form of heaven, as it were, the Pokemon version of heaven. That's what most people think of as the end. What there is something that seems to be happening that here and now, if people die today, and even though New Jerusalem hasn't come, there seems to be a division of where the people of God are held versus where the non-people of God are being held. But there's not necessarily
People of faith and
people
not
of faith and not
yeah.
people of faith. Then that's not necessarily the final form yet. That's not necessarily the intensity of heaven. It's also not the intensity of hell on the hell on the other side.
Hail.
People who've put their faith in the God of
Jesus.
the Bible,
Yeah.
not just people of faith. Just to
Yep.
be clear,
Oh,
we're not
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
people of faith in general.
Yeah,
Not universalism. We know
People who
that
put their
another time
faith
too.
in God's promise of salvation that was fulfilled in Jesus Christ.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah.
I like it.
And while the majority of this episode was us pulling the rug out from underneath of different stances and different and the ways that different things are in our culture, we have to, because the layers of these lies and these misconceptions are so thick upon the truth of what heaven actually is, of what our afterlife actually is. Like we have to take a chisel, take a hammer, and destroy these things to get back to the core of what it is. Stop, like I said earlier, stop trying to sugarcoat things with lies, but rather hold on to what we know. And even though we don't know all the details, the truth is that Jesus is better.
Right.
Yeah.
The truth is that what we do know is what everything that has been accomplished in Christ, and now who we are in him, we get to spend forever with him. What we do know is that every tear will be wiped away. What we do know is there'll be no more death. There'll be no more sin. There'll be no more sorrow. And who cares if we won't be married or look the same or anything? We'll be in the glory of God.
Yeah.
Like that far surpasses any pleasure we can even think about or that we've ever experienced on this earth.
Yeah, go
And,
listen to our sermon from this past Sunday, and then the rest of the sermons for April, because we do talk about this a little bit more. And
At the 456.
at the
the
456,
456
sorry.
church on anywhere you get podcasts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that wraps up for you guys,
Put your hope in Jesus.
Put your hope in Jesus. It's so much simpler. If you guys are listening, you haven't experienced death that's close to home. I'll tell you what, whenever I went through all this stuff over the past few years, it probably all started, I guess my dad passed away in 2013, and then just like, I feel like every other year for a while we were going through just major deaths. With this mentality, gosh, it makes funerals simpler. Like you're not having to entertain people around you the whole time. You can hear other people say the different things, and sure, if that makes them feel better at the time, whatever. You're not going to fight people at a funeral, but you can just say okay and let it like go off your shoulder. Because I mean that's what it was. I mean, even my dad's funeral, there were several people that I'm related to who I love that were just going around and just being like and just spouting the cliches that are just lies, that are just garbage. But in that time, obviously I'm not going to correct him, but all that to say, it made it simpler for me because I'm not grasping at straws trying to be comforted. Rather, I'm resting on the fact that I know that God is just. I have no idea where my dad was when he died. I know that he blatantly rejected Christ for a while. I also know that towards the end of his life, he wasn't so much. He was asking more questions and doing some things. I know that God is just. Wherever my dad is,
Is where you're supposed to
That's
be.
where you're supposed to be. I trust in the Lord, and I'm not going to take for somebody to say, well, he's in a better place now. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know. Sure, he doesn't have cancer anymore, but if he rejected Christ,
It doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter that he doesn't have cancer anymore. So anyway, that's a whole nother can of worms to open up in that specific regard. But it makes those things that you think it's simpler to sugarcoat it, knowing the truth and clinging to the truth, even with the question marks, it's so much simpler. So much simpler.
Well, and one last thought that just maybe is a gut punch, but if a pastor or a teacher that you're sitting under is regularly spouting misconceptions about heaven, it's either because they're, like Micah said, ignorant of the scripture, which is dangerous for a preacher.
Absolutely.
Or they are deliberately misrepresenting the truth or lying, which is also really dangerous, but a little bit malicious, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, the thing that matters
So
most
take
is
them to lunch and say, where are you getting this from?
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. And to encourage you guys, ask the questions. Pastors need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And if they have the answers, whatever, you can talk about it, figure it out. But if it comes from a standpoint of, I read this book, then you know, okay, well, it's not biblical.
Yeah.
It's not coming from that. Well, all that being said, Michael, do you have a simpler hack for us today?
I do. With all this new upgrade at the Garden Audio
Steven.
Studio.
So nice.
So I have a simpler hack for you guys in regards to technology. I'm sure a lot of you have dealt with this where you've had a computer that you just struggle with. Like you get it and it seems like it's going to work pretty good, and then you got to take it into the shop to get worked on constantly, and you just can't ever get it right. And over and over and over again, year after year, you're having to fix your computer. This is probably the simplest hack I'm ever going to give, right? Here's this fix. Ready? Buy a Mac.
I saw that coming.
That's right. Season 2, baby.
I've had my MacBook Pro since 2012, and it's still working.
Yeah, that's
So
impressive.
the number of computers I know my dad has bought, laptops, is probably 2 of my computers value-wise. So, I mean, you want to quit your computer problems?
Yeah.
Buy a Mac.
I love it.
Yeah, my sister, she was texting me the other day because they have to get, somebody spilled something on somebody's laptops. They're like, well, we have the money, we'll just go ahead and buy both of us laptops. And she was like, well, I don't want to get rid of mine though. It's 2011. She's like, mine's just fine. Yeah, it's it's an Apple. And so she was like, but it's not as some of the AirDrop capabilities and stuff like that. So she was like, since I'm going to be doing most of my work on an iPad, I kind of have to do some of those things. But she was like, I don't want to get rid of it though. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine.
10 years old. And
Exactly.
It works.
10
Yeah,
years
that's
old
literally
and
what happens. The only time you ever can't use a Mac is when it's so old that they don't do any software updates or app updates for it anymore, and then but it still works.
That's still like a 10-year gap.
Yeah,
Like,
we have a computer, a MacBook Pro, and that's probably the thing too. Like maybe if you want a really good computer, buy the MacBook Pro.
Spend the money.
But we have one that Cammie had back in the day. I don't know how old it was, like 2008, 2009. Something happened with the battery and it like puffed up the keyboard, and it still works. We just have to like plug in a mouse on the side, and I mean it can't do anything but like that we need it to do, but I can turn it on and use it. Yeah,
it's wild.
It
Buy
blew
a
up
Mac.
and it still works.
Not a sponsor, but hey, listen, if Tim Cook, we would love
We all
for you
own
to
Apple.
sponsor
We know
us.
you're watching. These are all iPhones right here.
And so Tim, we want you to know, man, like anytime you want to sponsor us, send us some T-shirts or anything, we'll be okay with that.
T-shirts.
That's just how they're gonna start.
Can you just give me some more stocks?
I'll take some more stock.
T-shirts.
I'll paint stuff for your house. In
I've
your
never
office.
seen an Apple T-shirt. I'm sure they're out there.
I know, but I want one.
That's not true. Anytime you go to an Apple store, everybody's
Yeah,
wearing
they
Apple
got
T-shirts.
the Apple Genius shirts on.
There's-
Speaking of geniuses,
there's
Steven's over there.
$700
Speaking of-
T-shirt.
That's right. Yeah.
You get a free iPhone.
With an
You have to
upgrade.
take an IQ test before you can wear it.
That's right.
Hey, Steven.
Oh, Steven's over
up?
there. We are at the Garden Audio. That's on Instagram. Go give him a follow. He's posted updates with what the studio looks like and stuff like that, and all the equipment that he's using over there. It's a good time. You also post memes and make those types of things over there. So yeah, go check him out. Follow him on Instagram. Show him some love. Say thank you for Simpler. Thank you for making it look and sound so good. Also, we at Simpler Pod are on Facebook and on Instagram, and also on YouTube. You guys have been killing it. Our subscriber numbers have been jumping over the past couple months.
Hey, thanks, guys.
We're around the 35 mark right now, and so we're about a third of the way to 100 to be able to customize more stuff on our channel. So if you were
help us get to 100.
Help us get to 100. If you're listening, you more than likely have some sort of Google account. Just go subscribe over on YouTube, and even if you don't ever watch on YouTube, that number will help us out a lot because we're able to do a lot more on that channel. And now that we look, I mean, it looks a lot better now.
Look at this.
We want to show it off. It's great.
Amazing.
We got full episodes over there. We'll have little snippet clips over there as well. You're going to want to check it out. It's pretty dope. Subscribe where you can, follow where you can. And yeah, you know what? Thank you for joining us for the first episode of season 2. You guys are awesome. I got to point everywhere, every single one now. You know what? As always, keep 4 cameras. Keep
Sorry, go ahead.
Keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? We'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.
We're out.
Nice.